Hey Terraformers, it's Andrew Brown and welcome to another video. I'm just going to tell you this week might be very hard, but there might also not be a whole lot of content just because we are going to be working with a Ruby mock web server, because we are going to be working with Golang code, because we're going to be interacting with the TerraTowns platform. You might find the video content here not as heavy, but there's more chance of prone errors. So I'm trying not to overload this week, and I'll do my best not to do so. But if you find this week not a lot of content, but very challenging, I'm just warning you up front, okay? So anyway, we are over here at our repository starting into week 2. And we need to get this application up and running. So I'm going to just pull up our Lucidcharts here so we have a reference. Just waiting for this Lucidcharts to load. There we go. And so let's just make sure everything looks to be the way it needs to be. We'll give it a moment to load in here. So we are on week 2. I believe in week 1 we actually end up removing the random provider. So technically this one goes away and is not there anymore. So we can take that one out. Just update that. But this is the week that we are on now. And so the components that are going to be new is going to be our Terraform provider. So this will be TerraTowns here. And that is, oops, that is this file or binary here. There are some technical challenges I haven't 100% worked out, but we have workarounds for it. But we'll get into that when we're talking about it. But right now what I want to do is I want to get a mock server here so that we can, or at least have a way of working through the API. Because when you are writing a custom provider, it's really challenging to test it against a live server. And so we need to be able to rapidly test against this. I'm very tempted to write from scratch with you a Ruby web server or some kind of mock web server, but I have to recognize this is a beginner bootcamp. And so what I've done is I've just prepared all the code in a repository. We will walk through the code, and I want to make sure that you understand how the code works. But that is something that we'll have to figure out. So this is going to be called TerraTowns mock server. I'm not really sure where we'd put this in our repo here, but maybe I'll just make a new diagram here for the way we're going to debug this. So the idea is that we are building a custom provider. So this will be our TerraTowns provider called Terraform provider TerraTowns. And I believe that we have to name it that way because a lot of times in GitHub, they want you to follow a very particular naming convention, and they're quite strict about that. But the idea is that we're going to write a TerraTowns provider, and it's going to have 4 different actions. And this is standard for all providers, is that you will define a resource. So we're going to define a resource called home. Okay. And this home has to have a read, an update, a create, and a delete. That it's a guaranteed that you have to have those. So we will make those actions. So we have ourselves, I'll go here and expand this. We'll bring this into the top left corner. We're going to have a read. We're going to have ourselves a create. Probably create first because you wouldn't ever read before you create. A create, a read, an update, and a delete. Okay, so those are the 4 there. And then we'll just bring this up into the top left corner. Okay. And I'm going to try to keep updating this diagram as best as I can as we work through it, just because I think it'll be, it might be confusing if we don't have a diagram for this. So I'm going to go down below here. We're going to call this week 2 TerraTowns provider. And this would be a logical diagram. No, there's one below it. Physical diagram. So this is called a physical diagram. where we are detailing a lot of the steps. Chris, who helped us with diagramming the last bootcamp, talked about those types of diagrams. And this is just where we provide a lot more details. But the idea is that we have our mock server. We also have teratowns.cloud, which is our real server, our production server here. Production server. This one, I'll just say production server. So it'll be teratowns.cloud. That'll be its address. And then up here, this will be development server. I can just put mock because it's mocked. And this is going to be on localhost 4567. That's how we're going to connect to it. This is going to be a Sinatra server. All right, so this one is Sinatra. I don't know if that matters, but I'm going to just put that detail in there. Sinatra. And then the one on the top is actually Rails, which you won't have access to the code base. The reason I'm not providing access to it is just because I want to not, if there's something that I didn't do that's the best way for security, I just don't want to show you that. But I think that we built it correctly, but just in case, I just want to not show that code. And I'm just going to make these as small as I can. There we go. And so I'll just put this up here to indicate this is a Rails server. And then I'll put this up here to indicate that this is a Sinatra server. So they're not one-to-one the same. They are different. Sinatra is a lightweight web server for Ruby, Rails, or web framework, and Rails is a heavy-duty one. I like using Ruby, so that's why we're using them here today, not Python. Nothing wrong with Python, but Ruby is really good for building web servers for both development and production. So there are these two things. And there's a few different ways we can interact with our web server. We actually have the Golang module here. So we'll say teratowns. This will be Golang binary. So just indicating what it is. Inside that we have a resource. Okay, that we'll have to create. We'll just say this will be a resource. And then these are endpoints that we'll have to have. But so that's one thing. Another way that we will interact with these servers is with bash scripts. So I'm just going to go here and just say bin teratowns. And we will have a bunch of scripts in here. Bash scripts. And the purpose of these scripts is to mock these endpoints. So it's the same thing. I'm going to go here and we'll do that. Okay. For HTTP requests. Drag this out a little bit. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring in this web server, which I have in another repository, and we're going to place it in ours so that we can work with it. And then once we have this web server in place, we're going to use these bash scripts in order to validate that we know how we want to interact with this server here, the mock server. Then we are going to build out our Golang, our provider in Golang, and then we are going to test it against the mock server. When that works, then we are going to, we're going to do this in isolate, by the way. We're going to test just an isolate resource, not with the infrastructure, but like just the block there. And then we'll do it on production, and then we'll be in good shape. So there'll be a few iterations that we'll have to go through here, but the idea is that we want to have both sides mocked for making the request and receiving, processing it to the server. And we're going to use them in combination. And we're going to have 4 endpoints that we're going to interact with. So there are 4, and I'm just going to go here, and we'll list out what they are. So I'm going to go up here, and we'll just say endpoints or routes. So API endpoints, or routes, as they are generally called in web frameworks. And we're going to have a few here. We're going to have /API U, and it'll have the user UUID, and then it'll say homes / or colon UUID. And Originally, I always wanted everything to be called homes, but for some reason, I called some things houses, and I tried to retroactively fix that. So I know we talk about making the repo. The repo we're making is a Terra house, but really I prefer the terminology Terra home. And if that seems like nitpicking, well, that is the nature. That is the nature of what we do. But we have this one, and this is going to have a, what is this? This looks like a read to me. This is a get, and so that would be our read. And that would actually map to, I'm going to say like show or read, because in Rails, there's a convention to call it show, but you could also say that it's a read. Okay. So that is one endpoint that we have. I'll just put that in the front here. And then we will have, we need to have our create. So our create will be a post, and we don't need a UUID because at that point we don't know what our house is. So that is going to be our create. And then we are going to have, I might just align these to the left. We're going to have a put, and this will be for our update. So UUID, update, and we'll go down here, and we want to have our destroy. I guess the action would be delete. Well, internally it's going to be destroy in the Rails server, but the action we're going to take, or method we're going to take here, is called delete. Okay, so we have our 4 endpoints, and when you have a resource, and a resource in Terraform is, you know, anytime we make a block and it's called resource, you've seen that. If we go over to our code base here, into our main, I mean, this is a module, but if we go into our actual modules here, and then into here, you can see we are defining this resource block, right? So we've basically made a new resource, and this should be probably called Terra Towns _ house or home. So if we go over here, it might make sense to name it what it's going to be. So this will be Terra Towns home, and that's a resource there. Internally in the code, it'll just be called Golang. And actually what we might want to do here is I'm going to call that home there, but I'm just going to move this back a little bit and just represent our main TF file here. Okay, so we're going to have our main TF file. And in there, we're going to have a code block for, it'll be like resources. Is it resource or resources? It's just resource. I don't know if you can hear it, but my desk keeps shaking and it's driving me crazy. So if I'm pausing, it's because like for a second, it's because I keep hearing that shake. But what was it? Resource or resources? So we're looking for resource. Okay, and here we are expecting this to be Terra Towns home. Okay, and I think that's what it's supposed to be. I already have code that's completed in another repository, so I'm just going to go double check that. All right, so just taking a look at that. Yeah, it is going to be Terra Towns home, and then it'll be whatever we want to call that name. So, you know, my home, whatever we want to call that. And then we'd have our code block, and we need to pass in particular details to that code block. So we're basically defining what we want our resource to be, and then we're going to code that in Golang. So we're going to drag this on over. And in here, there's a few things we want to have. We want to have a name. So, and I'm just going to define this as something that I know. So there's a game called Arcanum that I like, and I might make a page on it. And so I'll just say, you know, Arcanum, it's like how to get started playing Arcanum in 2023, okay? It's a very old game from over 20 years ago, so I think it'd be interesting. So I'll go here and just have a description. So this would be something like, you know, Arcanum is an old game from the early 2000s. Worth playing today. Here is your guide to playing it without spoilers. Okay. I probably don't need to be as descriptive here. And so we'll have a name, a description. And this stuff matters because I want to make sure that you're aware of what we have to pass along. We'll have a domain name. So this will be whatever our CloudFront domain name will be. We're only going to allow things from CloudFront, at least at this time in the bootcamp. Okay, so there's that. And I'm highlighting that just because this is unique in terms of a requirement. So go here. So I'm just trying to convey any kind of information that is important, really important to know. I'm going to just color that a little bit differently like that. And we need to say what town it goes into. So this would be in the Gamer's Grotto. And then we'll have to set a content version, which is required. And this is going to be 1. So these are the values, basically the general payload, at least for the actions that we'll be using it for. And, you know, I might just simplify this. I don't think we need that full description in there. Okay, I'm just going to bring this in here like this and just bump this down a couple. There we go. And so this is how this resource is going to get loaded. So it's going to be in this code block here. It really does map to this, but I'm just going to do that. There's going to be another code block I think we'll need because we'll need to probably configure this. And we'll need a provider. So I'm just going to go down here. I'm going to just drag this on down like this. And I'll put this aligned like that. I'm going to need a new block. And this one is going to be provider. TerraTowns. And we want to provide a few options. We want to have an endpoint. And the endpoint's really important because it's going to say, how do we point to what? So this will say TerraTowns Cloud API, or sorry, .cloud API. And then we'll have to have a user UID. This will be, you know, it'd be something like DB84, you get the idea. And then we'll have to have our token. This is the token, this is your access token that you get from the TerraTowns platform. So, you know, again, it's going to be something that is funky. And so there are these 3 things here. Okay, the way our main file is going to know where to point, I'm going to just bring this up here. Bring this here, and then also this over here as well. Oops. The way our provider is going to know what server to point to is going to be based on this endpoint here. Right, so I'm just going to make a diamond over here so it's very clear where this is coming from. We don't have to use the diamond in the normal way. These shapes usually have a rhyme or reason in terms of how they should be used. I'm going to take the rounding off so I get a nice sharp diamond. I'm going to make that nice and small, and I'm going to go ahead and color this like this, red maybe, and indicate that that endpoint is very important because that's going to determine where this goes. I'm going to also put it on the other end, so maybe we can match that line up. Probably doesn't matter, but anyway, I'm going to just zoom on in here because I want to draw out here like that. Yep. And I don't need the yes in here. It's just doing that because it thinks it's a decision. I just wanted a diamond. And so it's going to determine from here, the endpoint, where it should go, right? And that way it's going to know that it needs to go here. We might even want to emulate what kind of call we're making. So let's say we do a Terraform apply. This would be the CLI. I'm going to just see, we have a CLI command? We do. Cool, I'm going to grab this icon up here. Just let me have the icon. We'll go down here for a moment. And I'm going to bring in the Terraform CLI. label here. And what we want to do is just apply, do a Terraform apply. It's nice and smaller here. And we'll say Terraform apply. And we're just going to indicate that a note here. Can we use the note? Since this is when we first create a resource, it will trigger the create action. Okay, create action, endpoint, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what we're going to show represented here. So I'm going to just highlight this as such. So just indicate that this is the first thing we're doing. Maybe make this, I don't know, blue. And then it's going to then trigger this create action, blue. Okay. Bring this down here. And the way that we are linking our infrastructure to it is basically this domain name. That's the only character that's going to link it. It's very simple, but you know, hopefully that makes sense. When we do a Terraform apply and it's the first time, it's going to trigger the create action, which will then go to this endpoint, pass the user UID, which gets passed through here. The thing is that some of these things are endpoints or headers, and it's based on the implementation. I might want to just illustrate that here. So I'm just going to go here and just say what's a header and what's not. There's a couple other things that matter, and that is that we need to have, I'll put that back in here. We need to have a few things. So, you know, payload requirements, or we would say payload schema. And technically we're doing a request, so we can say payload request schema. And I just realized my head's been covering this again. I really do apologize. I hope I haven't covered up too much while working through this. But we have our payload request schema here. I forget sometimes, you know? Like I was like this. I was like, yeah, let's do Terraform. You can't even see the screen. Sorry. I'm just kind of wondering, like, how much was I covering? Yeah, a good chunk of it too. Sorry. And I'll just drag these out a little bit farther here. And there are a few things that matter for headers. So for headers, we want to have, I don't know why there's no spacing on this one. Can I get some spacing on this? That's a bit better. So for headers, we need to have a content type of application JSON. We need to have an accept type of application JSON. Hopefully that is clear. We need to have a bearer token. So that would be authorization. Authorization. And that would be like bearer, and then it'd be our token, which is a standard way of authenticating for applications. I wanted to have the user UID as a header, but I just couldn't get it to work in, it was either Sinatra or Rails, so I ended up just putting it down below into the payload. And so for the body, which will be JSON, the things that we can accept here is going to be the name. Well, the user UID will always be present for every call, the name, the description, the town, and the content version. Okay, so this will start to make sense as we work through it, but this is the payload schema that we'll be working with. Is there anything else? I don't think so. I mean, we're not representing the AWS resources here, but I mean, it's pretty clear from up here that they get called in some fashion, but this is basically the whole flow here and all the resources that we're going to be using. So hopefully that is a good introduction into that. Before we jump into the code, I just want to stop the video here and we will go review the code next, okay?